The translator bead was still warm when Counselor Vethorin pressed it against her palm and read the transcript a second time. The words had not changed. She had hoped they might. The human had filed the combat report in their language first, which was unusual, and the autoconversion had produced something that made 3 of her senior staff quietly leave the room without explanation. Not in fear. In something she could not immediately categorize. Something closer to the feeling of standing at the edge of a structure and realizing, only after you had leaned, that the railing was decorative. The report was 4 lines long. The last line read, "Engagement concluded. No further intervention required. She asked me to stop." Past tense. 31 days earlier, the Ardent Meridian had dropped from FTL carrying exactly 1 human and 11,000 Vorath refugees fleeing the collapse of the Veth outer settlements. The Vorath were a protected species under the Interstellar Compact. Small, cerebral, architecturally brilliant, physiologically helpless. Their home clusters had been consuming themselves for 6 decades in a slow political implosion that the Compact had officially described as approaching resolution, in each of those 6 decades without measurable accuracy. The human's name was Sergeant Dara Osemensa. She was listed as security personnel on the manifest. That was the first misunderstanding. The second was the ship itself. The Ardent Meridian was a compact humanitarian vessel, unarmed by treaty, bearing the white and gold registry markers that guaranteed safe passage through 37 recognized jurisdictions. What the Compact's intake officers had not noticed, because they had not thought to look, because no one had ever needed to look, was that Sergeant Dara Osemensa had spent the 6-week transit doing something in the lower cargo levels. Nobody had thought to check the cargo camera feeds until much later. The third mystery emerged 4 hours after docking, when the docking authorities' atmospheric sensors flagged a chemical signature they did not recognize. Standard protocol was a hold and scan. The scanning officer ran it twice, flagged it to her supervisor, and the supervisor ran it a 3rd time before calling it a probable instrument malfunction and logging it as such. The signature was real. They would understand that later too. "You understand," said Consul Adra Veth, 3rd daughter of the Veth lineage, 19 years old in human equivalent terms, in possession of more political authority than several star systems, that the refugees are not your passengers. They are wards of the Compact. You delivered them. Your function is complete. She said this in the docking corridor, 12 minutes after the Ardent Meridian secured. She said it without turning to face the human, which was the Veth lineage manner of indicating that the conversation was a formality rather than a negotiation. Sergeant Daraminsa stood 2 meters behind her, still in transit clothing, carrying a bag that the consul had not asked about. "I understand," Dara said. "Good. You'll find quarters in the auxiliary wing. A return vessel departs in 9 days. I'll need access to the refugee processing levels." The consul did turn then. Dara's face did not change. It was a narrow face, high forehead, deep brown skin, eyes that the consul would later describe in her personal record as located somewhere between patient and inevitable. She was shorter than the consul had expected from the file imagery. The word meant something different when applied to a physical body than when applied to a political organization, and the consul was briefly, uncharacteristically aware of this. "Access," the consul repeated. "For what purpose?" "I know the refugees," Dara said. "Some of them have medical needs the compact intake system won't catch on first screening. I'd like to help with that." The pause. "You are a military asset, Sergeant. Not a medical officer. I'm a person with 9 days and some familiarity with the population. But if you'd rather I wait in quarters, I'll have someone escort you," the consul said. "You will not move unaccompanied through the processing levels." Dara nodded. She did not argue. She did not look disappointed. The consul would replay this moment many times in the following weeks, searching for the tell she had missed, and she would never satisfactorily find it. The escort assigned to Dara was a junior compact security officer named Tresh, young, conscientious, genuinely interested in the refugees' well-being in a way that the institution around him was not. He spoke 6 languages and was learning a 7th. He had a habit of asking questions he already suspected the answers to, not to gather information, but because he believed the act of asking respectfully mattered. He was, in most of the ways that count, exactly the wrong person to assign to Dara Osemensa. Within 4 hours he was following her through the processing levels not as an escort but as something adjacent to an assistant, holding things she handed him, fetching items she requested through channels he had not previously known existed within the station's supply system. She spoke to the Vorath refugees in their own language, not the formal register, the familial one, the one used between people who have shared enclosed spaces for a long time. The refugees responded to her differently than they responded to compact staff. The children moved toward her. One elderly Vorath male gripped her forearm with both his upper secondary limbs and did not let go for 7 minutes while she crouched beside him and listened to something Tresh could not hear clearly. "How do you know them?" Tresh asked, during a brief corridor transit between processing blocks. "I was with them for 6 weeks, Dara said. "The ship logs show you spent most of that transit in the cargo levels." She handed him a protein supplement canister. "Hold this." He held it. "That's a deflection." "It's a protein supplement canister." "I meant the not answering." She stopped walking, turned and looked at him with those patient inevitable eyes. "I was working," she said. "The refugees knew where to find me if they needed something. They usually did." "What were you working on?" "Tresh." "Yes." 9 more days, she said and kept walking. He followed. Because that was his job, he told himself. And because, and he was honest enough to admit this, later, in his own report, he had already begun to suspect that whatever was happening, he would rather be near it than not. On day 3, 2 things happened within the same 6-hour window. The first, the chemical signature in the docking bay was reflagged by an off-shift sensor tech who trusted her instruments more than her supervisor trusted his. She submitted a formal trace request. The trace came back inconclusive on classification but consistent with a category of compounds typically associated with industrial fabrication, specifically, high-stress bonding agents used in structural repair war. The second, Consul Adra Veth received a message from the Vethoran Council, the governing body that technically employed the consul and practically constituted the entire administrative apparatus of this sector of the compact. The message was brief. It concerned the 11,000 Vorath refugees now housed in processing levels B through F. The message said, "Processing is delayed pending review of resettlement capacity. Estimated timeline for resolution, 4 to 6 months. Tresh saw the consul receive this message because he happened to be passing her office corridor when the door was open. He saw her expression. He had worked for the compact for 3 years and had never seen that expression on her face before, which was not because she lacked the capacity for guilt, but because she had previously been very effective at ensuring she was never in a position to feel it at close range. He kept walking. He went directly to the processing levels. He found Dara crouched beside a structural column in processing block D, doing something with her hands that he could not immediately parse. He stood and watched for a moment before she spoke without turning. 4 to 6 months, she said. He stopped. "You already know?" The Vorath elder I was with earlier, Korvmasai, though he's not actually Veth lineage, it's an adoption name. He has a nephew in the compact administrative tier. Word moves faster than official channels when people are motivated. She stood, and he saw what she had been doing, examining a stress fracture in the column's base. The kind of thing that gets logged and deferred indefinitely in aging station infrastructure. What does that mean for them? Treshit. 4 to 6 months in processing. She looked at him. Have you seen the air recycling specs for these levels? No. They're rated for 3,000 occupants. Short term. She picked up her bag. Come on. I need to see the food synthesis allocation terminals. He followed. His chest felt tight in a way he did not entirely attribute to the recycled air. What are you planning? I'm not planning anything. I'm doing math. That's the same thing. She didn't answer. She moved through the corridor with the kind of deliberate unhurriedness that he was beginning to recognize as her version of urgency. Not slow. Not rushed. Inexorable. like a tide that had already decided where it was going and saw no reason to announce itself. On day 5, the consul summoned Dara to her office. Tresh was not invited. He waited outside the closed door and heard nothing. The office was sound insulated, and spent 40 minutes cataloging everything he had observed over the preceding 4 days and trying to construct a coherent interpretation from it. He could not. The chemical signature, fabrication compounds, the cargo bay work, the structural surveys, the food allocation data Dar had spent 3 hours analyzing the previous evening, the conversations with the Vorith elders that lasted too long for mere comfort and too short for strategy. The way she moved through spaces, measuring them, he realized now. She was consistently measuring spaces. He was still staring at the door when it opened. Dar came out first. The consul came to the threshold and did not follow. Her expression was the one Tresh had seen in the corridor 3 days ago, but accelerated, as if the guilt had been joined by something newer and less familiar. "What did she say to you?" the consul asked. Dara adjusted her bag strap. She wanted to know if I had any concerns about the refugee population's well-being. And I told her I had some thoughts about infrastructure. The consul looked at Tresh with the specific expression of someone who wants an explanation and suspects they are not going to receive one. "Escort her back to the processing levels," she said. Then she stepped back and closed the door. Tresh fell into step beside Dar. "Infrastructure," he said. "Infrastructure. You said something that put that look on her face." I showed her some calculations. "About?" Dar glanced at him sideways. "You know what's interesting about compact housing codes for temporary refugee facilities? I don't. They have a clause. Emergency habitability expansion. A station can be required to repurpose non-residential space if resident population exceeds a certain density threshold relative to rated capacity." She paused. "We exceeded that threshold 4 days ago." Tresh stopped walking. Dara kept walking. He caught up. "You invoked that clause," he said. I informed the consul that the clause existed and that the conditions for its invocation had been met, yes. That would require, he calculated, that would require the station to open residential tiers 2 through 4 to refugee housing. Those are staff and administrative quarters. Among others, yes. The council will appeal. Probably. And while the appeal is processing? She stopped at the processing block D entrance and looked at him. While the appeal is processing, she said, 11,000 people are not in a 3,000-person air-recycled box. He didn't say anything. She pushed through the door. He stood there for a moment longer, looking at the space she had left, and then followed her because he had stopped being able to imagine doing otherwise. This is where the Vethoran Council made its first catastrophic error of interpretation. They received the consul's report on the Emergency Habitability Clause invocation and immediately flagged Sergeant Dar Osamensa as a political agitator using legal technicalities to destabilize compact administrative authority. The council's legal analysis was, technically, not wrong about what she had done. What it catastrophically missed was why, and what the doing of it had cost her personally, and what she intended next. They assumed she was performing advocacy, making a point, the kind of moral statement that can be received, logged, and routed through remediation channels until it loses its force. They did not yet understand that she was not making a point. She was building something. Day 6. Tresh found her in the cargo bay. Not the station's cargo bay. The Ardent Meridian's cargo bay, which she had retained access to as listed crew. She had the lights on full. There were structures, he had no better word, standing in 3 rows along the central floor space. They were made from materials he half recognized, collapsed shelving units repurposed, thermal insulation panels bent and joined, the kind of modular connection hardware that comes in bulk on humanitarian vessels and never quite gets fully inventoried. They were shelters. Small, dense, structurally sound. He walked up to the nearest one and pressed his hand against the wall. It did not flex. "You built these," he said. "During transit," she said, from behind a half-completed 4th structure. "I had time." "With what tools?" "What I had. What I could requisition through the ship's supply manifest without triggering a flag." What the Vorith engineers in the refugee population helped me design once I explained what I was trying to do. She emerged, brushing composite dust from her hands. They're very good. The Vorith. Architecturally. You knew, Tresh said. He was looking at the structures, counting. Before we arrived. You knew the processing capacity was inadequate. I knew what the compact's processing record looked like for populations this size. I knew what the station's rating was. I did the same math I did here, 6 weeks ago in transit. She looked at him steadily. I had time. These are for supplement to the residential tier expansion. 63 additional private family shelters. Plus, she moved to a stack along the far wall that he hadn't noticed, water recycling auxiliary units. The Vorith built those. I provided the schematics. They improved them. He stared at her. How long have you been planning this? She tilted her head slightly. Define planning. Don't. I saw a problem, she said. I thought about solutions. I worked toward them. Is that planning? Or just, she paused, searching for the word, paying attention? He didn't have an answer. This is the moment Counselor Vethorin's retrospective investigation would later identify as the point of no return. Not for strategic reasons, but for a stranger one. Because when Tresh filed his end-of-day report that evening and included everything he had observed in the cargo bay, the council received it, analyzed it, and drew the conclusion that Sergeant Osei Mensa was operating under institutional orders, that some human agency or government was directing her actions as part of a coordinated intervention in compact affairs. They began preparing a diplomatic response to an organization that did not exist. They missed the simplest explanation. She was one person. She had looked at the problem. She had started solving it. She had done this not because anyone told her to, not because a plan required it, not because a strategy demanded it, but because, and this was the thing the compact's entire analytical framework had no adequate category for, the alternative was to watch 11,000 people suffer in an undersized box, and she found that option genuinely, physically, personally unacceptable. That was it. That was the whole answer. And it would take the council an additional 22 days to believe it. Day 7 brought the Veth princess. Consul Adra Veth's older sister. First daughter of the lineage, heir designate, political force significant enough that she traveled with a security detail of 8 and a communications blackout radius that could quiet an orbital. Her name was Sarah Veth Kalen, and she had been dispatched by the Vethorin Council to assess what was happening on her sister station and contain it if possible. She arrived in Processing Block C without announcement. Her security detail was professional, subtle, and completely unnecessary. She stood in the middle of C Block's central atrium and looked at what had been, 1 week ago, a sterile institutional corridor, and was now functioning as a communal space. Vorith children in 3 language groups being tutored simultaneously by an improvised rotation of adults. 2 elderly Vorith with engineering backgrounds explaining something geometric to a cluster of younger ones using the shelter components as teaching tools. A food distribution line that was somehow both orderly and human in a way compact lines rarely were, running on a schedule that Tresh had heard Dar design out loud while walking, adjusting it verbally, building it from nothing the way other people build sentences. Sarah Veth Kalen stood in the middle of this and said nothing for 40 seconds. Then she said, "Where is the human?" They found Dara in Processing Block F, crouched in the corner with Corvith Masai, the elderly Vorith male who had held her arm on day 1. He was speaking quietly. She was listening with her entire body, the particular physical quality of human listening that several alien species have independently described as uncanny because it resembles in posture what their own predator fauna does before a strike, but feels in practice like being completely, uncomplicatedly held. Sarah Veth Kalen watched from the corridor entrance. After 3 minutes, Corvith Masai finished speaking. Dara reached out and covered his upper secondary limbs with both her hands. She said something Sarah could not hear. The old Voritha's bioluminescent skin patterning, a Vorith stress response that Sarah had seen many times in the past weeks, went from its characteristic anxious fractaling to something smoother. Then Dara stood, turned, and saw the princess. Neither of them moved for a moment. "Sergeant Osei Mensa," Sarah said. First daughter, Dara said. Sarah looked past her at the elderly Vorith, then back. Was he saying goodbye? The council has ordered all refugees transition to holding Category 3 pending appeal resolution. The emergency expansion order is being suspended. Dara said nothing. I'm told you invoked the emergency habitability clause. Sarah's voice was careful, diplomatic, creatively, accurately. The distinction may matter less than you'd hope. The pause. The council's position is that this was unauthorized interference in compact internal. Where will they go? Dar asked. I'm sorry. If the emergency expansion is suspended, where will 11,000 people go while the appeal processes? Her voice was the same. Patient. That particular patience that had begun to feel, to everyone who encountered it, less like a personality trait and more like a material property. Back into B through F? Sarah held her gaze. Those are the operational parameters, yes. The air recycling. I'm aware of the air recycling ratings. Then you know what 4 to 6 months in B through F means. The princess's jaw tightened. It was almost imperceptible. What I know and what I can unilaterally override are different things, Sergeant. I know. Then you understand why. I'm not arguing, Dara said. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. Silence. Which is? Sarah asked. Keep working. She picked up her bag. Excuse me. And she walked past the first daughter of the Vethoran lineage, the heir designate of the most politically significant family in this sector of the compact, carrying her bag with that same inexorable, unhurried quality, and went back to work. Sarah stood in the corridor for a long moment after she left. Then she went to find her sister. What happened next would be the subject of the investigation that produced Counselor Vethoran's late-night reading session, the warm translator bead, the 4-line report, and the last line that had sent 3 of her staff quietly out of the room. But the investigation's records would later also contain the cargo bay footage, which no one had reviewed until day 8, when Sarah requested it personally. 43 hours of footage. Dara, alone or with Vorith engineers, building in almost continuous shifts with brief sleep intervals that the camera timestamp logged at 90 to 140 minutes each. This was the part that made Sarah's analyst pause the footage and rewatch it 3 times, not for strategic information but because of a simpler, stranger detail. During the long work sessions, Dara talked to no one, or rather, to the Vorith engineers when they were present, but also when they were not. To the structures she was building. To herself, occasionally. And once, during an uninterrupted 4-hour session at hour 31 of a 38-hour work stretch, she had sat down against the cargo bay wall with a cup of something hot and spoken continuously for approximately 9 minutes in a language the auto-translation rendered as a regional human dialect associated with a coastal region of a continent called West Africa, and which Sarah's analyst found no complete translation for, but which pattern recognition flagged as consistent with the oral structure of a specific type of human emotional expression. A lullaby. She had been alone. 43 hours of footage. She had sat against a wall at hour 31 and sung a lullaby to a cargo hold full of structures she had built by hand for people she had known for 6 weeks. Sarah's analyst included this in the report. Sarah circled it. Day 9. The return vessel arrived. Dara's transit authorization was active. No one had rescinded it. Tresh found her in processing block D. She was teaching 3 Vorith adolescents how to perform basic maintenance checks on the water recycling auxiliary units they had built, showing them, not explaining, guiding their hands to the component that needed turning, waiting for the click, watching their faces when they heard it. Your ship is here, he said. She nodded. You're not on it. No. He sat down on a piece of repurposed shelving. His shift had ended 2 hours ago. He had not left. He had been doing this for 9 days, he realized, not leaving, as though his body had made a decision his brain was still processing. What happens if you stay past transit authorization? I lose my berth priority. I go on a waiting list. She guided another Vorith adolescent's hand to the component. Maybe 3, 4 weeks before the next available transit. And in 3 or 4 weeks, The appeal will either be resolved or it won't be. She watched the adolescent examine the unit with new confidence, then turned to look at Tresh directly. If it isn't, I'll have 3 or 4 more weeks. He stared at her. You planned this. Tresh. You planned to miss the ship. I was here, she said simply. The ship was also here. Those were 2 separate facts. That is not. The next part of the maintenance check, she said to the Vorath adolescents, is the filter housing. Watch. And she turned away from him, and the conversation was over in the way that Dara ended conversations, not with hostility, but with a simple redirect of attention that somehow felt less like dismissal and more like an implicit invitation to decide whether you were going to stay and be useful. He stayed. Sarah Veth Kalin requested a meeting. Not a summons. A request. She sent it to Dara's comm designation at the 23rd hour of day 9, and Dara responded within 4 minutes, which told Sarah that she was awake and likely had been for some time. They met in the small observation room off the main docking corridor, where the station's outer hull curved away into the dark of space, and the stars were present in the particular way they are present when you are looking at them from somewhere that used to feel secure and now feels newly provisional. Sarah came without her security detail. This, too, was noted in the record. I've been reading about humans, Sarah said. Dara waited. Your species' median recorded maximum continuous labor duration in crisis contexts is extraordinary. She wasn't looking at the window. She was looking at Dara. The cargo footage. 38 hours. With 90-minute sleep intervals. I've done longer. I know. Your service record. She stopped. You have a service record that my security staff found disturbing to read. That's a common response. The part they found most disturbing, Sarah said carefully, was the casualty section. The room was quiet. Most of the entries, Sarah continued, aren't yours. Dara looked at the window. Every major action in your record, Sarah said, lists your survival as a notable outcome. Not your success. Your survival. She paused, as though returning alive was the anomaly requiring explanation. The stars were very still outside. The Vorath refugees, Sarah said. Korveth Masai. What did he say to you on day 1? When he held your arm? Dar was quiet for a moment. Then, he said the ship smelled like something his village used to make. A food. He hadn't smelled it in 11 years. The pause. He wanted to know if there was any left. Was there? No. But I knew what the compound was. She looked at Sarah. I spent day 2 finding the closest synthesizable equivalent in the station's food processing inventory. It's not perfect. Sarah stared at her. He cried, Dara said almost to herself, when he tasted it. Just for a minute. Then he told me it was close enough. The silence stretched. You will lose your service posting, Sarah said. Missing transit without authorization. The Earth consulate will. I know. You knew when you missed the ship. Yes. And you still. Sarah. It was the first time Dara had used the shortened name. Sarah noticed. What would you have done? It was not a challenge. It was a genuine question. The kind that assumes an honest answer is possible and waits accordingly. Sarah did not immediately respond. She stood at the observation window and looked at the stars, and the stars looked back in their impartial way, and finally she said, I don't know. Neither do I, Dara said. Not abstractly. But when I'm standing in front of a specific person with a specific problem and a specific possible solution, she paused. I don't know how to choose not to. Here is what no one understood until the investigation. The chemical signature in the docking bay, the one the sensor tech had flagged and the supervisor had dismissed as instrument malfunction, was not a fabrication compound. The analyst who finally ran the full-spectrum trace on day 12, prompted by Sarah's request for complete environmental records, identified it correctly on the 3rd assay. It was a human pheromone complex. Not metaphorically. A genuine, low-concentration chemical emission produced by human bodies under specific conditions, which had saturated the docking bay during the ardent meridian S-birthing. The condition that produced it, prolonged exposure to grief. Dar had spent 6 weeks in a ship with 11,000 people who had lost everything. She had worked among them, eaten with them, listened to them in the ship's night cycle when the children couldn't sleep and the elders couldn't stop remembering. And her body had done what human bodies do, and the ship's air had carried it, and when she walked off the ardent meridian she had brought it with her like a second skin, this invisible record of sustained proximity to suffering. The analyst included this in her report. She wrote one additional line. Asterisk, the sensor system flagged it as a fabrication compound because we had no category for what it actually was. We do not currently have an established category for the biochemical signature of a species that has been grieving alongside strangers for 6 weeks. Sarah read this at 0200 station time. She sat with it for a long time. Day 15. The council's appeal reached hearing. Sarah testified. Not as proxy for the council's position, which she had been dispatched to represent, but as a direct witness to conditions in processing blocks B through F, which she had walked personally at Tresh's suggestion on day 11. Her testimony was, in the council's assessment, alarmingly thorough for someone who had spent only 4 days on station before filing it. The appeal was denied. The emergency habitability expansion stood. The compact began, with magnificent reluctance, the process of actually implementing it. Day 19. Dara received formal notification that her service posting had been suspended pending review. The notification came through the Earth Consulate Standard Channel and was politely worded in the way that polite wording becomes its own form of severity. Tresh found her reading it in Processing Block D, sitting in the corridor against the wall in the spot that had become, over 19 days, identifiably hers, the small dent in the composite wall where her shoulder blade had rested through enough consecutive hours to leave an impression. Bad? He asked. Suspended pending review, she said. Which means whatever comes after review. What comes after review? Depends on the review. He sat down beside her. The corridor was busy, Vorath families moving through with their belongings, beginning the migration to the expanded residential tiers, children running in the way that children run when they have finally been given enough space to remember that running is available. The sound of it was specific. Tresh had been hearing it for 2 days and had not managed to become fully neutral about it. It was worth it, he said. She looked at him sideways. Don't tell me it wasn't, he said. She looked back at the notification on her comm. I'm not going to tell you that. Then what? She was quiet for a moment. A Vorath child stopped in front of them, 4 years old, maybe 5, in a small orange jacket that was clearly new, compact issued, slightly too large. She looked at Dara with the specific evaluative attention of very young children. Then she reached out and patted Dara's knee once with a small 4-fingered hand. Then she ran to catch up with her family. Dara watched her go. Then nothing, she said. On day 22, Sarah Veth Kalen did something unprecedented in the 40-year history of the Veth-Orin lineage's involvement in compact governance. She filed a formal commendation for a non-compact, non-Veth individual. The filing cited infrastructure contribution, community stabilization, preventive medical intervention, and the line that made Counselor Veth-Orin pause her reading when she reviewed it, demonstrated persistent willingness to absorb personal cost in service of an outcome she had no institutional obligation to pursue. The council flagged the commendation for review. The review stalled. The commendation sat in an administrative queue where it would remain for 11 days before the counselor retrieved it personally at 0200 station time, along with the investigation file, along with the cargo footage, along with the chemical analysis, along with the 4-line combat report. The combat report requires explanation. On day 26, the Compact's Enforcement Division arrived to conduct a routine credential verification on all unauthorized personnel on station. It was, in institutional terms, housekeeping. In practical terms, it was a delayed mechanism for removing Dara. Her transit authorization had lapsed 17 days prior, and while the political situation had made direct action complicated, credential verification was procedurally available and legally clean. The enforcement team lead was a compact officer named Vethsorkov. He was competent, procedural, and had been specifically briefed that the situation was politically sensitive and should be handled with minimal conflict. He found Dara in processing block F. She was, at the time, physically interposed between the entrance to a family shelter and a secondary enforcement officer who had misread his location parameters and entered the shelter without authorization, frightening the 3 children inside. This had been going on for approximately 90 seconds when Vethsorkoth arrived. The secondary officer was backed against the corridor wall. He was not hurt. He appeared to be in a condition that his later report described as uncertain of outcome, which was a procedural euphemism that Counselor Vethorin found inadequate when she read it, and that the cargo bay footage supplement confirmed was accurate. Dar was not threatening the officer. She was standing between him and the family shelter entrance with her arms at her sides and her bag on her shoulder, and she was looking at him with an expression that the footage resolved clearly enough for analysis. Later, 2 independent analysts and 1 behavioral psychologist reviewed this footage and produced characterizations that agreed on only one element. She was not angry. She was simply present, in the manner of something that has decided it is not going to move and has stopped experiencing the decision as a decision. Vethsorkoth spoke first. Sergeant Osei Mensa. You are here under expired transit authorization. You are required to. He went into that shelter without permission, Dara said. She did not look at Vethsorkoth. She maintained her position and her attention on the secondary officer. There are children in there. The officer was conducting a registered sweep. He frightened them. Still not looking at Vethsorkoth. They've been frightened enough. The pause. Sergeant. We are here unauthorized. I know why you're here. Now she looked at him. I'll come with you. Voluntarily. Full cooperation. No delay. The beat. After he apologizes to the family. The corridor was very quiet. Vethsorkoth looked at his secondary officer. The secondary officer looked at the shelter entrance. 3 seconds passed. He apologized. He did it haltingly and in formal compact register rather than familial, but he did it. The mother inside, the footage showed this through the shelter's interior monitoring, held her children and listened and nodded with a dignity that made Vethsorkoth, watching from the corridor, look away briefly. Then Dara picked up her bag and walked with the enforcement team, voluntarily, as she had said. At the processing desk, Vethsorkoth filed his report. He listed the credential violation. He listed the voluntary compliance. And then, without precedent in his 11-year career, he opened an additional field, one typically reserved for imminent threat assessments, and in it wrote a single sentence that he later told colleagues he had added not as a strategic recommendation but because it was accurate and he felt the record should be complete. The sentence read, "This individual is not dangerous because of what she might do. She is dangerous because of what she refuses to stop doing." Sarah Vethkalen was the one who met Dara at the enforcement processing exit. Not Tresh, though Tresh was also there, standing 7 meters back with the specific posture of someone trying to appear as though they have not been waiting anxiously for 40 minutes. Sarah stood at the exit. She had a document in her hand. "What is that?" Dara asked. "A compact temporary residency grant," Sarah said. 30-day renewable. Issued under emergency humanitarian support provisions. She held it out. "I filed it 6 days ago. It came through an hour ago." Dara looked at it. Then at Sarah. "You filed it 6 days ago?" she said. "I knew they would come for you eventually. I wanted the paperwork ahead of them. You planned this." Sarah's expression shifted by the smallest possible margin towards something that was not quite amusement. "I was here," she said. "The paperwork was also here." Those were 2 separate facts. Dara looked at her for a long moment. Then she took the document. On day 31, Dara filed the combat report. 4 lines. The council received it, reviewed it, and understood approximately the top line of what it meant. They sent it to Counselor Vethorin, who read it at 0200 with the warm translator bead pressed against her palm, and then read the whole file, and then sat alone in her office in the station dark for a long time. The last line of the report read, "Engagement concluded. No further intervention required. She asked me to stop." The engagement was the credential enforcement proceeding. The "no further intervention required" was the residency grant. And "she asked me to stop" Was Sarah, standing at the processing exit, who had said, the audio log confirmed it, who had said quietly, before holding out the residency document, asterisk, please. You've done enough. Let someone else carry this part. And Dara had stopped. Not because she was finished. Not because the problem was solved. Not because anyone had won. But because someone had asked. And because she understood, the way she understood everything through the specific weight of direct experience, that sometimes the most necessary thing is to let another person do the carrying, because carrying together is what makes the weight survivable. The Council's final report on the incident ran to 400 pages. It addressed the legal questions, the administrative failures, the precedent implications of the Emergency Habitability Clause, the handling of the chemical sensor data, the diplomatic status of the Earth Consulate's involvement, and 17 other institutional concerns. It dedicated 3 paragraphs to Sergeant Darth Minsa. Counselor Vethorin wrote those 3 paragraphs herself, which was unusual. She was known for delegation. But she wrote these herself at 0200 station time, and she revised them 4 times, and the final version read, in its entirety, as follows. Asterisk, the subject does not appear to operate within a framework of strategic calculation in the conventional sense. Attempts to model her behavior as institutional maneuvering, coordinated intervention, or political performance have been consistently unsuccessful because they assume a form of optimization this individual does not appear to practice. She does not optimize. She identifies a condition she finds unacceptable and continues addressing it until the condition changes or she is no longer able to continue. The distinction between these 2 outcomes appears, in her framework, to be a matter of logistics rather than significance. Asterisk. Asterisk, the compact has no adequate classification for this. We have categories for agitators, advocates, operators, and idealists. What we observed was something prior to all of these. A function, almost. The function of a species that has learned, across a long and difficult history, that the most reliable way to change conditions is to refuse, consistently and personally, to accept them. Asterisk. Asterisk, this is not political strategy. It is not heroism in any formal sense. It is, we believe, simply what humans do when they look at a problem that is in front of them and decide, for reasons that appear largely immune to cost-benefit analysis, that they are the one who should fix it. 11,000 Vorith refugees were eventually resettled across 4 systems. The process took 8 months, not 4 to 6. During those 8 months, Dar Osemensa renewed her temporary residency grant twice. Tresh stayed on station. He transferred to Refugee Processing Liaison, a position he created by submitting a proposal to the station administration that cited, in its needs assessment section, 11 specific incidents from the preceding 31 days, all of them involving gaps between institutional protocol and actual human need that had been bridged, every single time, by one person doing it manually. The proposal was approved. He was told this was unusual. He said he was aware. Sarah Veth Kalin returned to the council. She brought, along with her personal effects and her official reports, a copy of the cargo bay footage, not the full 43 hours, but a specific 9-minute excerpt from hour 31. She showed it, without commentary, to 3 council members who had been most vocal in their characterization of the incident as political destabilization. She did not explain it. She let them watch a human being, alone in a cargo hold at hour 31 of a long dark shift, sing to the structures she had built for people she would not see again for weeks, in a language none of them could fully translate. None of them spoke for some time afterward. One asked, eventually, what she had been singing. Sarah told them a lullaby. Traditional. Coastal region of a continent called West Africa. The translation was incomplete, but the approximate meaning of the repeating line was something like, everything that has ever loved you is still loving you right now. The stars outside the compact station turned as they always did, indifferent, vast, magnificently unconcerned with the administrative proceedings of species who had only recently learned to travel between them. In Processing Block D, in the small dent against the composite wall where a shoulder blade had pressed long enough to leave a mark, someone had placed a small object. Vorith made. A geometric form, architectural in style, about the size of a closed fist. The material was the same composite used in the auxiliary shelters. No one saw who put it there. It was logged in the station's artifact inventory as decorative installation, origin unknown, retention recommended. It was still there 6 years later when a new class of compact processing officers came through on a training rotation and their instructor paused at Block D to show them something. She pointed to the dent in the wall. She pointed to the small geometric form. She told them the outline of what had happened there, which by then had been compressed by institutional memory into something cleaner and more manageable than the actual 31-day record. One of the new officers asked why anyone had bothered. Why one person with no authority, no institutional backing, no certainty of success, had kept going. The instructor was quiet for a moment. "There's a line in the Compact's own investigation report," she said finally. "One of the council wrote it. It says," she paused, as though the sentence still required preparation even after years of knowing it, "it says that humans are not strategic about suffering. They simply find it unacceptable. And they keep moving toward the thing that would end it for as long as they are physically capable of moving." Another silence. "That sounds exhausting," the new officer said. "Yes," said the instructor. "I think it is." She looked at the dent in the wall for a moment longer. "I think they know that," she said. "And they do it anyway. That's the part we still don't have a category for." They walked on. The corridor filled with the sound of their footsteps and then gradually with other sounds. The station's ordinary daily noise, the movement of people going about the business of living. The geometric form sat in its small niche in the wall. In the investigation files, sealed now and archived in 3 separate compact repositories, the chemical analysis report still waited, the one about the sensor that had flagged a fabrication compound and been dismissed as a malfunction. The one with the final line that no subsequent reviewer had managed to edit into something more institutional. "We do not currently have an established category for the biochemical signature of a species that has been grieving alongside strangers for 6 weeks. Outside, the stars continued. Civilizations that had existed for tens of thousands of years orbited their suns in the long rhythms of entities that had learned, long ago, to wait out anything. And somewhere in the transit network, on a ship headed toward the next place the paperwork said there was need and no one was yet going, a human sergeant sat against a cargo bay wall with a cup of something hot and talked, to no one, to the empty space, to the structures she had already started building, in a language that had no complete translation, about everything that has ever loved you, and how it is still loving you right now, in whatever dark you are currently crossing, regardless of whether you have remembered to believe it. The galaxy did not understand this. It was not sure it ever would. It was becoming, slowly and against considerable institutional resistance, afraid that it didn't need to.